Now let us take up our next question, which is question number 18. So the question says, define pollination. Explain the different types of pollination. Then list 2 agents of pollination. And the last part of the question says, how does suitable pollination lead to fertilization? Now first of all, this is a very scoring question which has a weightage of 5 marks. And this question has come from the chapter, how do organisms reproduce? Now if you see this question has been divided into several parts. Now for defining pollination, you are going to get 1 mark. For explaining the different types of pollination, this is going to fetch you 2 marks. And for the agents of pollination, 1 mark. And here the last part will give you 1 mark. In totality, there are 5 marks. So even if you are able to answer till this part or this part, you are going to get absolutely 1, 2, 1 and 1 marks individually for every part. Now let us try to see how to write it in a correct way. So the first part would be the definition of pollination. Yes, what is that? The process of transfer and deposition of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower is known as pollination. And as I have promised, this is going to give you 1 mark. Now, different types of pollination. In general, there are 2 types of pollination. One is self-pollination and the other one is cross-pollination. Now, number 1 we have is self-pollination. What is this? It is the process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of same flower. So, remember, in self-pollination, the flower would be same. In cross-pollination, the flower is going to be different. So, here we have cross-pollination. So, it is the process of transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower. So, these were 2 types of pollination, and for each of them you are going to get 1 mark here and 1 mark here. So, in totality 2 marks for this. Now, the next part was you have to label any 2 agents of pollination. So, here I have mentioned 3, but you can write any 2. So, here you can see also that pollination can be achieved by the agents like wind, like water, and also by animals. So, as I've said, this is going to give you 1 mark here. And last but not the least, so we had to tell that how does suitable pollination, so here you can see that how does suitable pollination lead to fertilization. Now here is the answer. After pollen lands on a suitable stigma, it is going to reach the female part. Yes, it is going to reach. So here first of all, after pollen lands on suitable stigma, it has to reach the female germ cells which are present inside the ovary. For this, a tube grows out of the pollen grain, and that tube, my dear students, is known as pollen tube. Yes, pollen grain lands onto the stigma, and then from this pollen grain a pollen tube emerges, and that pollen tube carries male gametes to the female gamete which is present inside the ovary, and this travels, the pollen tube travels through the style to reach the ovary, and then fertilization occurs. So that's the mechanism of fertilization, and this is going to give you 1 more mark. So yes, successfully you have earned 1 plus 1 plus 2 here plus 1 here. That means you are going to obtain 5 out of 5 marks here. Now students, this question had a choice also. So let us see the choice, the OR part. Now this OR had 2 parts, part A and part B. Now first of all, let's try to solve part A. Part A has a weightage of 3 marks. This is for 3 marks. Now, if you see the question, it is saying that identify the given diagram. You have to identify this, okay? And then you have to label the parts from 1 to 5. Now, for identifying the given diagram, you will score 0.5 marks. And rest of the marks, so you have to see part 1 to 5. So, rest of the marks will be distributed to label these 5 parts. So, what do you see, students? What is this given diagram? Isn't it the diagram of female reproductive system? So, yes, this is the diagram of female reproductive system. For writing this, you are going to get 0.5 marks here. And then we have to label it. So, if I start from 1, it is a tube-like structure which is known as fallopian tube. So this is fallopian tube. Now part 2 that you see here, this one, this is ovary, almond shaped structure, ovary. Then this segment, this part 3, this is uterus, the dome shaped structure. This is uterus. And here in the end, here you see 4, this is cervix. And then the last part is the birth canal, also known as vagina. So here we have to write down, this is vagina. So you can see 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5 and 0.5. So this is 2.5 for labeling the parts. So from labeling you are going to get 2.5 and 0.5 for this. So in total part A is going to give you 3 marks. Now let us try to solve part B. Now here is part B. Part B comprises of 2 marks, students. Let us read the question here. The question says, what is contraception? List 3 advantages of adopting contraceptive measures. Now students, if you only define what is contraception, this is going to give you 0.5 marks. And then you have to list 3 advantages. So if you list 3 advantages, 0.5 for all 3, which means you are going to get 1.5 marks for listing. 1.5 marks. Now let us try to answer first of all the first part, that is the definition of contraception. Guys, birth control methods which are intentionally, which are deliberately meant to prevent fertilization are referred as contraception. So the birth control methods which deliberately prevent fertilization are referred to as contraception. And as I have said, this is going to give you 0.5 marks. Okay, then we have to list 3 advantages. Now here are 3 advantages. Number one advantage of adopting contraceptive measure is that it prevents unwanted pregnancy. It prevents transmission of STDs, STDs as in sexually transmitted diseases. Also, it controls the birth rate and determines the size of population. So all of them, 0.5, 0.5 and 0.5 is going to give you in total 1.5 marks. So you can see here 1.5 and 0.5. So this is going to give you 2 marks. So here coming back students, this 18th question, 5 marks were for this part and the OR had 2 parts, part A and part B, and totally this OR part is going to give us 5 out of 5 marks. 3 marks for part A and 2 marks for part B. Now let us take up our next question here.